lawyers, we are starting one more live stream, and I'm gonna ask you to please let me know if image and sound are working good, if they're working well. I'm using a kind of portable setup over here, so any feedback will be welcome. And let's start by taking a look at the news. Let's see what's going on. I'm not sure if my screen sharing is working. Therefore, I'm gonna share with you the main headlines. The main headline today on Estadão. Estadão is a Brazilian newspaper, traditional Brazilian newspaper, and they are the main headline is about the very unfortunate gun shooting that happened in Canada with at least 10 dead people. Very unfortunate. So that's the main headline. Our condolences to the Canadians. Very unfortunate event. Okay. There is another major headline, interesting, discussing about an island in the state of São Paulo, right? And typically, islands by the Brazilian coast, they are not private; like they are owned by the federal government, and actually not only the islands, but actually the first section of the coast, which is interesting to foreign citizens acquiring property in Brazil, because whenever you are buying like a beachfront condo, for instance, many times you're going to need to deal with the federal government because there is a kind of ownership in which you have a participation of the federal government, right? That's the so-called terreno de marinha. And terreno de marinha, it could be translated by land owned by the Navy, right? Or the, maritime authority in Brazil. And then there is an additional procedure for you to transfer this property, which could take a while. And you also pay an additional fee to the federal government on top of the usual annual property taxes, right? And that doesn't happen everywhere. There are some areas in which the property is still beachfront, but you're not going to pay this fee. And there are others which are not immediately beachfront, but they also have to pay the fee, right? And the reason for this, interesting distinction is that like there is a historical guideline, to assess whether or not the property is contained in the so-called terreno de marinha, right? And guess what? This the sea level has been changing over time, and there is also intervention by the cities, by the public authorities on the coastal area. And as a result, sometimes, yes, you're going to see a property that is kind of far away from the beach, but it is within the specific area, and vice versa. You could have, a property that is pretty much beachfront, but for some reason, it is considered to be outside of terreno de marinha. Okay, so that's something that typically concerns foreign citizen buyers. And, there is this concept that there is a blank prohibition, but most of the time there is no blank prohibition. There is just like additional hassle, right, for the buyer. And of course, there is an additional maintenance cost component because, again, you're going to be paying not only the property taxes, annual property taxes, which are traditionally paid to the city, but you are also paying stuff to the federal government. All right, so that's the cost of having like a beautiful property by the sea, if you will. All right. And let me know. I don't see any messages so far. Let me ask you if you are around, please ping me here in the chat window so I know you can see me, you can hear, and things are working as they should. All right. No participations in the chat yet. There's just a blank chat for me. I'm usually concerned whenever that happens. All right, General Principal. All right, como vai, Mr. Oliveira? Happy Wednesday. Can hear you loud and clear. Thank you, General Principal. Good to see you over here. Thank you for the confirmation. Very important. I don't want to be here just talking by myself. I want to make sure that you guys are in the loop, that you can hear and see what I'm saying. We also have, for those of you who are not familiar with Brazilian culture, next week we're going to have a carnival, right? Carnival is actually starting officially this Friday, right? So on Friday, carnival in Brazil is starting, and it goes up to next Wednesday. And, for most employers, for most businesses, for most people, there is this break starting on Friday after work, right? So we still come to work on Friday. And then naturally you have Saturday and Sunday, which are very active for Carnival, like for those, like main events that you typically see on TV. And then we also have like a Monday and Tuesday. They are Carnival days, right? So kind of 4 days. And then on Wednesday, very interesting, like the first half of the day is traditionally given as a break to employees. And then, like the second half, they are expected to work. And the way we see it, right, like from our cultural perspective, is that, people are typically so tired of Carnival, physically tired, right? Like I'm not talking about, annoyed or anything like this, but more like physically tired. They're so tired of Carnival that they need to, I don't know, like wake up later in the day on Wednesday, right? And then of course there are religious reasons as well, like for the Carnival break and for the resting on Wednesday as well. But again, break on Friday after work, typically after 6 p.m. And then people back at the office, depending on the firm, on the company, on Wednesday at noon or Wednesday at 1 p.m. Here at the firm, we typically, ask people to come on Wednesdays because we have a lot of, immigration cases going on, and we don't want, our clients without an update for several days in a row. So we give, the Monday and Tuesday breaks. But on Wednesday, we just give like the morning time. So, in the afternoon, we have pretty much the entire team back to the office, and getting back to their regular activities. All right, let's see what else we have here. Okay, we have a kind of interesting update on immigration. São Paulo, like the Polícia Federal in São Paulo, the immigration station, they are now requiring a formal proof of address during the registration for foreign citizens. So let's say if you are applying for the digital nomad, if you are applying for the retirement, residency, if you are applying for family reunification, which is the technical name for the marriage-based permanent residency. For all of those things, they are no longer accepting, the typical letter issued by Airbnb as proof of address. Okay, now they are requiring that your landlord is going to issue like a formal letter stating that they are your landlord, that you're renting the property. They are also going to ask a utility bill on the name of the landlord, and this document must be notarized in Brazil. and that's pretty annoying to the landlord, right? So, that's a very good tip for whoever is coming to Brazil, that you should check ahead of time, right? Like before you go ahead and rent an Airbnb property, you need to check whether the property owner or the property manager, if they are willing to give you this notarized letter. Okay, the point here is that the notarization needs to be done by the landlord. And guess what? I mean, landlord, they're busy, they're doing their stuff, and they're not asking you to rent their property, right? Typically, the property is on Airbnb, and then it's really a concession, right? Like it's really something that the landlord is going to agree to do additionally to whatever is encompassed by the Airbnb platform, right? Now, another interesting distinction is that those criteria, they are enforced depending on the federal police location, right? So in Rio de Janeiro, for instance, they are not enforcing this requirement for the notarized letter from the landlord. So in Rio de Janeiro, you could still use the letter from the Brazilian Federal Police. I'm originally from São Paulo, and I don't mean to basically trash the São Paulo Federal Police Station in charge of foreign citizens. But like their service is not near the same quality you would find in other states, right? Like the São Paulo, and I understand, right? Like São Paulo probably faces the largest demand for foreign citizens procedures, but listen, that's not your problem as a foreign citizen, right? That's the Police Federal's problem, right? So their reaction is always to make the lives of foreign citizens more miserable, right? Like, so instead of getting their act together and making it easier for foreign citizens to obtain whatever they need, they always do the opposite, right? Like, so they are always bringing new rules, and it looks like maybe to even dissuade people from showing up, and maybe like to send the people to other states, if you will, right? Because if you are in the decision stage of picking a city, and you know how challenging the interaction with the São Paulo Federal Police is, guess what? You may decide to go to Rio de Janeiro, right? You may decide to go elsewhere, and maybe that's the whole intent, right? Let's make this thing so convoluted that people are going to stop eventually coming here, and guess what? We're going to have some room to breathe, right? So there is that as well. Demand is just like out of the chart in São Paulo. But that's very unfortunate. We have a bunch of clients, right? Like as we speak, entangled with this new requirement. So guess what? They have a scheduled date to show up. And now that they are enforcing this requirement, which, by the way, they don't give you a heads up, right? Like, they just start enforcing out of the blue. We have a bunch of clients, running or chasing their landlords to get the letter, right? And there is even one case here that the client is potentially, they are going to need to get another property just for the sake of securing the letter from the landlord. Okay, so sharing as an update. I see here general principle. I know foreigners tend to seek the coastal areas, but can you give a view into the inland areas of Brazil, like Centro-Oeste and North regions? Are there attractions or celebrations in this area? Yes, there are, general principle. Absolutely, right? Like, so traditionally, the north of Brazil and the Centro-Oeste is something very Brazilian, right? The way we see our map, or the way we divide like the different regions in the country. We have this concept of Center-West, right? Which naturally covers a lot of the inland areas, right? And you do have, very interesting, like locations. They are not as populated naturally as the coastal areas. Now, in terms of celebrations, they also have, and typically is going to be a substantially smaller celebration when it comes to Carnival. Carnival, it is something for some reason associated with the coastal areas, right? I don't know, like, I mean, when you are by the coast, I guess you are, happier and more excited to celebrate things. Maybe, that's a concept. But I can tell you that pretty much in every a major Brazilian city, you're going to have a celebration. But again, they are not going to be as meaningful as you would see, by the coastal cities. And so if you think about the Northeast, right, you have several capitals. They are all typically, by the coast, and they attract a lot of tourists as well. They attract a lot of Brazilians as well. So Northeast of Brazil are really, major area for Carnival. Okay. Now, interesting to note, Brazil is not actually by the coast, right? Like, sorry, São Paulo. São Paulo is not really by the coast. From São Paulo, for you to get to the coast, you're gonna typically spend an hour driving aside of the inner city traffic, right? So sometimes you're gonna, if it is like peak time, you could easily spend over an hour just to get to the road that is gonna take you to the coast. All right, but aside of this nuance, São Paulo is 1 hour away from, like Baixada Santista, which is like the immediate coastal area by São Paulo. And nevertheless, São Paulo is pretty big for Carnival, and I guess just because of the economical power of São Paulo, meaning that São Paulo has money to spend on Carnival, and like 20 or maybe 30, right? Like 30 or 40 years ago, you wouldn't see pretty much any meaningful, parades in São Paulo. But nowadays, parades in São Paulo, they are getting bigger and bigger and better, to the point of actually, competing with Rio de Janeiro, right? Like Rio de Janeiro remains naturally, right, the number one carnival in the entire country. But nowadays, São Paulo is catching up because, again, because of the sheer economic capacity of São Paulo City, right? So basically, they have so much money that they can put together, parades that are going to compete with Rio de Janeiro. Now, interesting that both cities are going to work together in order to organize the parades. So usually you're going to see the first parades in São Paulo, because it's like a warm up, right? Like, so São Paulo is warming up. It could be like, on Friday and Saturday. And then after that, you're going to have the main course. The main course, your entrée is going to be actually Rio de Janeiro Carnival, right? So they don't allow those events to overlap. But that's pretty much like São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and then, in parallel, you're going to have everything else, like the Northeast and so on. Another distinction is that in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, you have the parades, right? So traditional parades in a dedicated area. And in other locations, like in the Northeast of Brazil, you have what we call Carnaval de Rua, right? Or, a carnival from the street, meaning that, sometimes they have, we call it a trio elétrico. A trio elétrico is a kind of adapted bus with a band. And, this bus, they're going to, typically drive by the beach. And then everybody will follow those, either buses or trucks. And they're going to be celebrating along with the band, right? So that's more typical in the Northeast. You also see that happening in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. But again, São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, the main event is typically the parades that are going to happen in a dedicated area of the country. Okay? All right. Didi, bom dia, Luciano. Hope you and your family are well. Same here, Didi. Good to see you back. I hope everything is good with you. James Rochas, olá, tudo bem? Tudo bem, James? I am based on Fortaleza. If I decided to renew my digital nomad visa in Bahia, will they ask a police report from Fortaleza? If I don't provide, will they check? Because I will on travel. I will be traveling, maybe. James, yes, they are going to ask you for, and let me tell you something, James. It's difficult for us to tell you what they are going to ask you, right? We can never tell you, to be honest with you. We can tell you what they typically ask, right? And your renewal is not at there are two steps for the renewal, right? Like the first stage is for you to apply for a renewal of the digital nomad, and this is done at the federal level. There is a government system, the Migrante Web, and that's where you're going to file the application with all the compliant documentation, okay? And the compliant documentation from a background perspective is going to be a background check from the state in which you are based, right? So if you are staying in Fortaleza, this is going to be the state of Ceará, right? They're not going to ask for something on the city level, so it's going to be on the state level of Ceará. They're also going to ask for federal level matching the Ceará location, okay? So this is what they typically ask. They ask for state background checks. They ask for federal background checks, both addressing the state in which you are based, right? Now, just to show you how this could be different, let's say if you are a U.S. citizen and they can tell, and they can, right? And they can tell you've been, traveling to the U.S. often during this 1 year digital nomad visa. There is nothing precluding them to ask you for, guess what? An additional background check from the United States. Okay, so we can never tell you what they're going to ask, but for the majority of cases, they do ask for those two levels, federal level and state level. Okay. When we are working on a renewal, we typically issue those certificates on behalf of our clients. All right, James, I hope that was helpful. And just another point, like this is like on the approval process through system, right? So you're not going anywhere, you're applying through a system. After the approval, then you need to register again. So let's assume all the paperwork is compliant, you get the digital nomad renewed. Guess what? Then you need to show up at a new appointment with the Brazilian Federal Police for another, registration, if you will. And during the registration, they typically give you the protocolo. And then in the protocolo, you're going to have information about your new residency period, right? And then just like the first time, the card is going to take a while to become ready, and then you need to come back to pick up the card at that location. Now we have this piece of news, Polícia Federal from São Paulo, now they are enforcing a requirement for a proof of address that is notarized by the provider. And, if you're renting, like this should be provided by your landlord along with an actual utility bill showing the landlord's name, right? So they're basically saying, all right, like I see here, utility bill says that João da Silva is the owner of the property, and João da Silva is providing a letter saying that João da Silva owns this property, matching the utility bill, and that, John Smith is renting the property, right? And this letter needs to be notarized in a Brazilian cartório, right? So pretty strict, pretty demanding requirement. We don't think this is reflected yet, or maybe hopefully it will not reflect on the other Polícia Federal stations, but it could be. Who knows, right? All right, Didi, Luciano, I will officially retire this year. Seeing that my mother was Brazilian, would it be easier to get retirement visa or apply for citizenship by birth? I want to visit Florianopolis for home. Right, Didi. Right. So, it's difficult to tell you what would be easier, Didi, like, without seeing your documents as we speak, right? So, for some people, the citizenship route is super easy, which means basically, right, you need to have enough documents to show up at a Brazilian consulate abroad, register your birth certificate at that consulate, and then later register the whole package in Brazil, right? So that's pretty much what you need to assert your citizenship in Brazil. However, it's very easy to say, not so easy to do that, right? Because many people, sometimes you need documents from a deceased parent, or there is some issue with the birth certificate of the person, and therefore you are unable to comply with the strict paperwork requirements from the consulate, right? So, in other words, it could be easy, it could be difficult, it could be impossible. Okay. Now, talking about the retirement route for the retirement, nowadays, if you apply to a consulate abroad, typically it's going to be easier, right? And the major challenge is that you need health insurance with coverage in Brazil, which if you have it, it's great. Consulate is going to be typically my recommendation. If you don't have it, then my recommendation is for you to skip on applying to the consulate and apply while physically in Brazil instead, right? And so there's that. If you're going to apply in Brazil for the retirement track, then you need pretty much, all the main documents apostilled in the US, which is totally doable. It's just like, a substantial cost. So when you're doing like the retirement route, between FBI background check and the apostilles and so on, you could easily spend $1,000 just like on the documents alone, right? Like we're not talking about our fee. But it's doable, okay? We do it all the time. We have, a bunch of retirees in the pipeline. Very interesting to note, we also have many veterans, right? We have many veterans who apply with us. Like we're very proud of being of use, for veterans and many, like disabled veterans, right? So that's an interesting aspect of the Brazil retirement track. This is available for those of you who are veterans. It does not matter your age, right? Like, I mean, until a while ago, I used to brag, right? Just joking here, but I used to brag that we were approving people in their 30s. And now I can brag saying that we have a client who was approved in his 20s, okay? And this is naturally, right, a major upside, but we also need to take into consideration the, very meaningful downside of the disabled status of our clients, right? But I think this is very nice from the Brazilian government to skip on the age requirement or age analysis. As long as you have, traditional retirement income, you're good for the retirement track. There is no limits on age. Now, there is a limit on the type of income that you can present. We have, a large number of people who are going to, schedule a consultation with us, basically, to run their income by us, so we can assess the chances of success for an application. And I can tell you that, the type of income that the Brazilian government is looking for is traditional retirement income. right? So, very common people will come to us and say, well, I don't think it makes sense because I have this boatload of money invested in funds and I have more than enough money. I can prove, the Brazilian government could not care less about your big pile of money, right? There is a regulation saying that it must be traditional retirement income. And what is traditional retirement income? It is like Social Security, pension funds, right? And disability. Okay, these are the three main types. As you depart from those three main types, things start to become a long shot. So you could ask me, all right, what about Roth IRA, right? What about just an IRA? That's not a Roth IRA, okay? What about a 401k, super typical in the United States, right? Well, Brazil doesn't think they are as typical as a social security income, but they are typically a good shot, right? Like, we don't guarantee approval, but traditionally we've been approving people with income arising from 401ks and IRAs as well, right? Now it starts to become a really long shot when you come up with, well, I have $1 million invested in real estate, right, which by U.S. standards is not even that much. Or I have 1 million reais invested in funds. I have 1 million reais in, I don't know, crypto, right? So those are really long shots, and we typically do not accept such cases, right? Because we don't want to be working with a client who will probably become very frustrated down the line, right? Like, when you try something, it doesn't work, you have a lawyer, guess what? Typically, you may want to, blame the lawyer, right? Oh, I paid this whole money for you to help me, and now I have this thing denied. So, whenever we see long shots, guess what? We don't take those cases. It's not good for the client. It's not good for us, and therefore, let's not do that. Now, again, 401k, Roth IRA, all right, or any IRA for this matter, pretty good. Another interesting distinction is that even though Brazil is very strict on the type of retirement for you to qualify for the retirement, either visa or residency, they give you a break if you are unable to reach the $2,000 a mark, right? So let's assume you have Social Security, and that's super common to help here with our clients. Client says, well, I just have 1,200, right? So they don't have the 2,000, but they have 1,200. And then, it is written in the, regulation for the retirement track that the foreign citizen can basically use a secondary source of income to carry him over the finish line, right? So again, in our example, 1,200 of Social Security. Let's say if this person has a property in the U.S. and they are renting this property for $800, so he could use the $800, even though it's naturally not a traditional income. He can use that to supplement the 1,200 of traditional income, and that's going to be typically accepted by the Brazilian immigration. All right, we have Marisa Navas. Good to see you, Marisa. I hope you and Ricardo are well. Tell us, I want to ask you, and I'm going to ask you in Portuguese because you are in Portugal, perguntando para a Marisa e o Ricardo se a chuva já parou. All right, muita chuva também aqui no estado do Rio de Janeiro. All right, so for those of you who are still practicing Portuguese, I did ask Marisa about, the raining season in Portugal. It looks like it's been raining for about a month non-stop in Portugal, particularly Lisbon. I think Leiria, right? There was even like a stadium that collapsed. I'm not sure if it was in Leiria or a different city in Portugal. And I've been to Leiria recently, actually. And I just hope they are fine. And that's what I was talking in Portuguese. And I also said that it's raining a lot in Rio de Janeiro, right? Like pretty much every single day. For those of you who are in Rio de Janeiro, typically, like late afternoon, that's when, raining is going to get really intense in Rio de Janeiro. And by the way, talking about Rio de Janeiro, there is something major going on this week. And let me see if I can play here their advertisement. Not really, I don't have set up in this computer. And it is like, the Remax partner we have in Rio de Janeiro. And so they are preparing an event for this Friday. Okay, so if you are in Rio de Janeiro, or even if you have friends in Rio de Janeiro, let them know about this event. It is like at Remax Leblon, or is also known as Remax Nomad States. It is in the neighborhood of Leblon. Is right behind the soccer club Flamengo, right? Like, I mean, Flamengo is probably, in my opinion, number one soccer team in Brazil. For some people, maybe number two after Corinthians, right? But in my opinion, it's Flamengo. So right behind the Flamengo's club, that's where they are located in the neighborhood of Leblon. And they are going to have this event basically for foreign citizens, right? So if you're a foreign citizen in Rio de Janeiro, consider on Friday you can drop by. They have like a gift bag, to give out to those of you showing up. They're going to be talking about real estate in Rio de Janeiro. They also have something else which I think is super interesting. They have a realtor training program, right? Because they work basically with foreign citizens. They need realtors who are, from the United States, from the UK, and so on. So they can also help you out understand the realtor's career in Rio de Janeiro, and they can also talk about real estate, as an investment, as a track for you to secure permanent residency in Brazil as well. All right, so this is going to be on Friday. If you are interested, I'm going to share here the contact information for Kina. Okay, and Kina is she's our liaison with Remax Nomad States. So if you send an email to Kina, say, Kina, I want to show up at the event. So she's going to work things out so you can go on Friday and enjoy the event. All right, Didi, I have old apostilled birth certificate from my childhood, but they want my mother's birth certificate from Brazil. The U.S. consulate for Brazil is all online. Yeah, so yes, exactly, Didi. That's the problem. Like I told you, right? Like, I mean, the consulate, they are pretty strict. Securing Brazilian citizenship is very easy in a sense that once you meet those requirements, guess what? There is nothing for you to do. You can pretty much just show up and grab your citizenship, right? But if you are missing documents that they are requiring, we don't typically have much to do. Something we could do, Didi, if you are interested, and we could do something. I think very competitive for you, because that's something we never did in the past, and I'm not gonna expand much on that. Otherwise, it's gonna be like a consultation. But you can also get in touch with Kina, Didi. I'm gonna tell Kina to offer you a quick call with us to discuss that. Like, we could file for a constitutional claim in Brazil, right, to compel the Brazilian government to let go of this requirement, okay? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand you have evidence that your mother was born in Brazil, but you don't have her birth certificate, right? So from a certain perspective, is like they are being too formalistic, right? Like they're just saying, well, you know what? I have this checklist. Guess what? If you don't meet this checklist, that's your problem, not mine. And in my opinion, they are they are precluding you from asserting your well-deserved Brazilian nationality by being sticklers, right? Like, I mean, they're basically saying, you know what? Like, I mean, this is the checklist, and not my problem, right? And I think that as long as you have, like enough evidence that your mother was born in Brazil, so maybe we need something, right? Like, I mean, and just a copy of document, I don't think it is enough. But let's say if we are able to secure, let's assume your mother, she was born in Rio de Janeiro, right? Let's assume we can get like the certificate of birth from, the United States, stamped by the U.S. consulate in Rio de Janeiro, and we can, file this constitutional claim against the Brazilian government. I think there is a pretty reasonable chance that the judge in charge of reviewing your claim would direct the consulate to let go of the birth certificate requirement from your mother. But like I said, it gotta be consistent, and it gotta be strong in a sense that there is no question that your mother was born in Brazil. Okay, even if we are just presenting, like documentation from the U.S. consulate in Rio de Janeiro, right? Not guaranteed. Okay, not guaranteed. At the end of the day, they could have this kind of defense. Well, it is like a foreign government saying something, for for a citizenship application, right? Which could be kind of concerning, but I think it's well worth a shot for you to file a claim. And just to let you know, in Portuguese, the name is Mandado de Segurança. I'm not sure if in English it could be writ of mandamus, like, writ of mandamus. I think it's the closest legal remedy in the United States that would be similar to the mandado de segurança in Brazil. All right. So yeah, get in touch with Kina. We can schedule like, this 15-minute follow up with you, and then we can discuss about the costs. And again, this is not something we did in the past, but I like, if you allow me the comment, like I see, this tough spot in which you are. And I think it's just sad that you would need to apply for something like retirement, right? Like, I mean, it doesn't make sense. Like, your mother, if she was a Brazilian, like, I mean, you should be entitled to Brazilian citizenship, right? Like, I mean, that's just too much for me to swallow, right? Like, to have someone like you applying for the retirement. Yeah. So let's talk about that, and let's work on a plan. All right, Gigi. Thank you for sharing. All right. So let's see what else we have. James, obrigado. Is there a startup visa in Brazil? I want to open a one-person startup here. James, yes, there is. We don't call it like startup or entrepreneur visa like it happens in Portugal. In Brazil, we call it visto de investidor, okay, or the investor visa. And typically the investor visa is going to be based on the money that you are investing. There are two different thresholds. One threshold is like for companies in general, which is 500,000 reais. And there is a second one, which is like for innovation companies, right? Not necessarily startups. Like, I mean, they don't care much about this label. They care that you are working on something that is not commonplace in Brazil. So let's say if you're bringing a new technology, it could be AI, it could be, biotechnology, it could be something that is like innovative, right? If you will, then they typically reduce that from 500,000 to 150,000 reais, right, which is a pretty low threshold if you compare to the threshold for the real estate investor visa, right? We don't typically help with those visas here. If you've been, listening to our live streams for a while, you probably know we don't like it just because there's so much entanglement in Brazil with labor regulations, like the natural risk of every new company, right? Like, I mean, even the United States, most of the companies, they are going to close in the very first few years. And guess what? In Brazil, I would say it's probably even worse than that. So we just don't like we don't think it is in our clients' best interest to help them with this journey, right? We say, listen, I hear you, I see your ideas, but we're not gonna touch that. Whenever we think there is a very high, chance of, you know, failure, guess what? We're not gonna get into that because I think, at the end of the day, if you're hiring an attorney, right, like you have a legitimate expectation that things go well. And if we know ahead of time that chances are it's not going to go well, guess what? We don't want to participate in that journey. All right, James. But again, that's our take. There are many other firms in the market who are going to be very happy, very happy to help you on that, right? Like, I mean, they are basically not. I'm not bad mouthing them, right? Like, I'm just talking about the reality. I think most law firms out there, they're gonna love to get your business, okay? And that's the deal, right? Like, I mean, there is something to be done. You're gonna pay a fee, and they're gonna do what you're hiring them to do it, right? They are not that concerned with the end result. That's the way it is. All right. So let's see what else we have to share. Well, if you hear with us and if you could like our live stream, that's helpful for our business, that's helpful for other people just like you. So go ahead and like our live stream. Our next live stream is going to be on next Wednesday, right? Next Wednesday is going to be the day after Carnival, and we're still going to be with you. So no worries. We're going to be together next week. Again, I see we have more viewers now than we had at the beginning. So, starting on Friday is going to be Carnival, which is like a major event in Brazil, and it is so interesting that here in Brazil we say that the year starts after Carnival, and I'm not kidding, right? Like in some cities, for I don't know why, but in Florianopolis, right? Like in Florianopolis, I was in Florianopolis like last month, and it was, I don't know, I think it was like January the 10th, right? So I'm not talking about the first week of January, right? It was almost like half January, and there was a bunch of places that were closed, right? So they are closed in a sense that, like for whoever is passing by, like you would think the company went under, right? But that's not the case. It is just because there is, I would say, unfortunate, if you allow me, there is this unfortunate cultural understanding that the Brazilian year actually starts after Carnival, and I don't know what people are doing in the meantime, right? I guess it's up to each one of us to decide how they want to conduct their affairs. But it's just like honestly, it bothers me that we have this mentality of waiting for Carnival to happen to then start to take the year seriously. And maybe it is changing. Maybe it is a more like old conception. I don't know. Sometimes we don't update our understandings, our understanding of things. And but Carnival, I don't know how good it is to our country. All right, I think you can tell I'm growing older, right? Like, I mean, trust me, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I would think very differently about the Carnival, right? So I guess we all change as we progress in our journey, right? But listen, from like a cultural and maybe artistical perspective, Carnival is just a blast. It's amazing, right? Either in Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, the Northeast. It's a real, I would say, potentially life-changing event, like when you see what Carnival is in Brazil, right? So there you go. Like there is like a positive note about Carnival for sure. And yes, let's proceed. Let me take a look. Let me know if you guys have any other subjects to be discussed. Again, I was sharing about the change in procedures that is happening as we speak in São Paulo, right? For those of you who are planning for immigration procedures in São Paulo, Polícia Federal in São Paulo, the one in Lapa, which basically handles all the immigration procedures such as registration, permanent residency through marriage, which they call family reunification residency. All of those things, like they are, making more difficult for foreign citizens to register. Now you need to present a proof of address that is notarized, right? Like, I mean, if you're renting an Airbnb, now you can no longer present that letter that is issued automatically by Airbnb to prove your address. Now you need a notarized letter from the landlord, and God knows if the landlord is going to provide you or not. Okay, so just a heads up. And immigration in Rio de Janeiro, it remains pretty friendly. Like typically in Santos Dumont, right? That's where Santos Dumont Airport. That's where immigration. The immigration station is based in the city of Rio de Janeiro. It remains super helpful and not always perfect, right? Like every now and then we're going to have some issue with a client. And maybe there is a nuance over here. I was discussing with our team members. It was actually on Friday last week. Sometimes, it also depends on how you come across. Okay. Like, I mean, the immigration officer behind the counter, they have some discretion on how to enforce the requirements. So if you are just like, a respectful person, right? Like, I mean, if you don't show up, coming across as entitled, right, to things, like, I mean, you're gonna actually increase your chances of success substantially, right? Like, I mean, some clients we had trouble with during the registration stage. Like, we could tell they had a very, like, I'm not sure, a stronger personality, or they would, show some disdain for the immigration procedures, or they would, think they are above, right? Above like those folks who are working hard at the Brazilian, immigration. And listen, I can tell you, they can read that. Like if you show up, and if you come across arrogant, I guarantee you're going to have trouble at the federal police. Those folks, they are just doing the same thing all day long. And the last thing they need is someone behaving like a jerk, right? So that's a heads up. I'm not saying any of you are a jerk. I'm just saying if the reading from the Brazilian immigration is that you're being a jerk, chances are they are going to make your life miserable, right? So, just be, like I said, be respectful, try to have, if not a smile on your face, try not to appear as, upset or, again, arrogant. And that could work in your favor, all right? That could work in your favor. I hope that was helpful. So we are arriving at the end of today's live stream. I want to say thank you for your participation. Thank you for the interesting topics that you brought to our live stream. And I hope to see you all next Wednesday. Is going to be the same time, 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. Wishing you all a blessed rest of your day. And remember, if you want to show up at the event in Rio de Janeiro, that's going to be an event from Remax Nomad States in Leblon, Rio de Janeiro. Send Kina an email, and she's going to hook you up with folks at Remax, and you're going to have a blast on Friday. All right, you all take care, and see you again next week on Wednesday.